I'm going to work through the problems on solving by completing the square worksheet so that if you have any questions, hopefully you can see if you made a mistake, what went wrong. So the first three questions are just asking for us to find what value should go in place of the smiley face. So looking at number 1, we have x squared plus something x plus 16. So if we work backwards, we know that this number was squared. So the number that was squared must have been 4. And then whatever we got to square here was half of this number. So I'm thinking that one should be 8. So the way we check is half of this is 4. 4 squared is 16. So looking at number 2, we have x squared minus something x plus 144. So again, if we work backwards, we had to square something to get this number. So the number we squared must have been 12. And 12 was half of the number that was there. So that must make that 24. So if we think about this one, half of 24 is 12. 12 squared is 144. And for number 3, this time we're looking for the last number. So the way we get this number is we take half of this and square it. So half of 10 would be 5. 5 squared would be 25. All right, so now we're going to go through and actually complete the square on these questions. So number 4. So starting, we know that we cannot factor this problem as is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 35 out of the way because that is not the right guy for the job. So a squared plus 12a plus blank equals negative 35 plus blank. All right, now I need to fill this in. So what we do is we take half of this number and square it. So that means 36, which is added to both sides. So now we can factor this, and it will be a plus 6 squared. On the right side, we get 1. Now we want to solve, so we need to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of a plus 6 squared is going to be a plus 6. The square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. Whoops, sorry about that. So now all we need to do is solve for a. So subtract 6 from both sides. So we get that a is negative 6 plus or minus 1. So what that means is that we could have negative 6 plus 1, which would be negative 5. Or we could have negative 6 minus 1, which would be negative 7. So those are our two solutions. All right, next one, number 2. B squared plus 20b equals negative 75. Now what's good about this one is that 75's already been moved over. So he's not the right guy to factor this out, so we need to get him out of the way. So to figure out what should go here, we're going to take our middle term. Half of this is 10. 10 squared is 100. So now we can factor it, and it's going to be b plus 10 squared. And on the right side, we get 25. So to solve, we need to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of b plus 10 squared is b plus 10. The square root of 25 is going to be plus or minus 5. Now we need to subtract 10, so we get b by itself. So b is negative 10 plus or minus 5. So if we have negative 10 plus 5, that would be negative 5. If we have negative 10 minus 5, that would be negative 15. So our two solutions are negative 5 and negative 15. I said 2. I actually meant, that was actually number 5. Oh, there we go. Looks pretty close. Close enough. All right, here we go. Number 6. C squared minus 14c. All right, I know that negative 32 does not work. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that to the other side, which is going to be positive 32. So now we need to figure out the magic number here. So half of negative 14 is negative 7. Square that, we get 49. So now we can factor this, and it's going to be c minus 7 squared. On this side, we can add this together. We get 81. To solve, we need to take the square root of both sides. So we get c minus 7 equals plus or minus 9. Add 7, so c is 7 plus or minus 9. So 7 plus 9 would be 16. 7 minus 9 would be negative 2. So our two answers are 16 and negative 2. Number 7. All right, d squared equals 9d minus 5. All right, so now this time, this 9d needs to come back over here. So d squared minus 9d equals negative 5. And we know that 5 is not going to be the right number for that spot, so we can get rid of that. All right, so now we need to think a little bit. So half of negative 9, well, that's an odd number. So half of negative 9 would be negative 9 over 2. And if we square that, we will get 81 over 4. So that is what we are adding to both sides. All right, now we can factor this, and when we factor it, what goes in here is half of our middle number. So that's going to be 9 over 2 squared. All right, over here, we need to combine a negative 5 with 81 over 4. So I'm going to rewrite negative 5 as negative 20 over 4, because that's the same thing as negative 5. And now I have common denominators, so I can combine these together, and we get 61 over 4. To solve, I need to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of d minus 9 halves squared is going to be d minus 9 halves. On the right side, I don't know the square root of 61, but I know the square root of 4. So now we just need to add the 9 halves to both sides. So when I do that, I have a common denominator. So I'm going to end up with 9 plus or minus the square root of 61, and both of those are over 2. Now, we don't know what the square root of 61 is since it's not perfect, so we can leave our answer just like that. Okay, next up, number 8. So now we're dealing with a leading coefficient. So when we have a leading coefficient, we need to take it out of the way. So we are not going to figure out our magic number until we get rid of this 4. So I'm going to take the 4 out, which is going to leave e squared plus 6e. And now I'm going to figure out what our missing number is. So half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. But before you jump over here, we're putting a 9 where it's going to be distributed by 4, so what we've really done is just added 36. So now I can factor this. Don't forget the 4 in front. So this will be e plus 3 squared. And on the right side, we get 27. So divide both sides by 4 so that that will cancel out. Now I need to take the square root of both sides. So on this side, we have e plus 3. Over here, we have plus or minus square root of 27, but we know the square root of 4 is 2. All right. I know that I can simplify the square root of 27 because I can break that down into 9 and 3. So the square root of 9 would be 3 with a 3 left inside. So now to get what E is, I just need to subtract 3 from both sides. So it looks like, sorry, I almost wrote the wrong number. But the deal here is that we really would rather have this as one big fraction. So in order to get negative 3 to add with this, I need to rewrite this as negative 6 over 2, because negative 6 over 2 is the same thing as negative 3. So now we have negative 6 plus or minus 3 square root 2 over 2. Sorry, I'm off the screen there. All right, last one. So number 9. So a lot going on here. We need to get everything together where it should be. So on the left side, I want the variables. So I have 3f squared. I'm going to subtract that 24f so that I'm going to have negative 36f on the left. And then I'm going to move the 9 to the right side, so that will give me negative 18. So you might just need to pause for a second and work through that. All right, we have a leading coefficient, so we need to take that out because we're not going to do completing the square with that. So now I have 3 that I took out, so that leaves f squared minus 12f. Half of this is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. But when I go to add it over here, I'm actually adding 3 times 36, which would be 108. So now I can factor this. F minus 6 squared. On the right side, it looks like we get 90. Divide both sides by 3, so that cancels. And now I have 30, so f minus 6 squared equals 30. Take square root of both sides, so f minus 6 equals plus or minus square root of 30. Now, if we think about square root of 30, we would simplify it if we could, but we can't, because that would be 3 and 10. Neither of those are perfect. 2 times 15, those aren't perfect. So now what we need to do is add 6. So f is going to be 6 plus or minus the square root of 30. So the square root of 30, since it's not perfect, we would have to estimate it, and we don't need to work that out. So if we knew what the square root of 30 was, which we can estimate it to be about 5.5, then we would have 6 plus 5.5, and then 6 minus 5.5, and those would be our two solutions. All right, so that takes care of the worksheet that was called Solving by Completing the Square.